1.
Welcome back to Senate Education, Tuesday, May 3rd, 328. Ms. Zaglowski, thanks for your patience with us. We have you here on S100. Good to see you again.
Thank you. It's nice to see you and all of the committee members as well.
Feels like it's been a while. So S100, I know you've been following the work, so we're eager to hear what the VSBA, your thoughts on it.
Okay, Sue Zaglowski, Executive Director for the Vermont School Boards Association, and I'm happy to be with you here today to provide testimony on S100. I'd like to thank you for making it possible for me to come a little bit later in the day. I wasn't available earlier this afternoon when you heard from Mr. Francis and Mr. Nichols. I testified on this bill in the House Education Committee on March 23rd, and my main 2 points at that time were based on positions that were developed by the VSBA board at its March board meeting. And they are simply, one, that VSBA supports universal school meals in Vermont schools, and two, that the funding should come from a source other than the education fund. Under S100, as passed by the House, funding for a one-year program of universal meals comes from the statewide education fund. If the legislature moves forward with S100, we think that this is a better approach than the original approach, which would have imposed an unfunded mandate on local school districts. And regarding the possible funding of universal meals in the future, our position would be that the education fund should not be the funding source for those for that program. As a statewide association, the VSBA needs to pay attention to all of the important policy considerations affecting schools. And as the committee's been discussing, another significant initiative is the PCB mitigation and remediation that will be needed when the testing that the legislature mandated last year detects levels exceeding standards. In discussing the education fund outlook, the VSBA board identified funding for PCB mitigation and remediation as a significant need. So I wanted to make sure that that thinking was conveyed to you because that's the thinking of a board that consists of 23 school board members from geographically diverse areas of the state. It's an important conversation because identification of PCBs could significantly interfere with in-person operation of schools and have a direct impact on educational outcomes. Just like to ask the committee members if you could, for a second, put yourself in the place of a school board member who's serving in the state and they're facing required PCB testing in their schools and they don't know what's going to be found. If PCBs are found, it's going to be extremely disruptive to their school community. And without a state funding source, that's very destabilizing. And as we all know, more instability is not what school communities need right now. So we don't think it's responsible to put a testing requirement in place without providing a state funding source for the cleanup, which could be in the millions of dollars. So we do hope that you'll support a state funding source for PCB remediation and that there's a way to also move forward with 1 year of universal meals that are provided for in S100. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ms. Zaglowski. Just for clarification, you want the universal meals the one time and then that's it? Sort of the pilot, or I missed whether or not you want them to continue on? Or you do want them to continue on just with a specified fund other than just the general fund?
I think we'd like to have the conversation of whether they should continue on next legislative session when there's more information that's gathered with this 1 year program.
Thank you. Questions for Ms. Zaglowski? Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Ms. Horton, are you going to add some additional comments? You mentioned that you had some additional information, please.
Nora Horton,
You're welcome to join us. It's whatever you're most comfortable with.
That's great. So I was doing a little digging on my phone just now. So there was a question, Senator Perchlik, you asked a question about do other states fund universal school meals through the general fund? And Maine was offered as an example. But what's important to note there is that Maine doesn't have an education fund at all. So Maine funds 100% of its education expenses out of their general fund. And that's 45% of their general fund
Oh.
is used to fund their education system. 29% of that is used to fund their K through 12. So they are funding universal school meals through their general fund, but they fund every education expense in their general fund. Vermont is the only state in the country, as I'm sure you all know, that funds education the way that we do. So that's just to
important
make that
clarification.
clear.
Thank you very much for that. Very helpful.
And then Senator Campion, you
Yeah.
asked me, sorry, my glasses are fogging up.
Right.
You asked me earlier whether the advocates, the Universal School Meals Coalition would support breakfast only. So we would not, and Hunger Free Vermont does not. So the same exact amount of effort would have to be carried out next year to do either universal breakfast and lunch or universal breakfast only. And feeding a child who needs those meals one time a day really is not supporting their educational needs. And as one of the school nutrition directors in our state put it to me, it's at this point for them, they would still have to go back to a pricing system for lunch. So the cafeteria, the cash registers would have to go back into the cafeteria. And it's kind of all of the hassle or none of the benefits at this stage in the game that we're in.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, if we were to lose all of it, including breakfast, there would be kids arriving at school hungry and wouldn't have an opportunity to eat. But you're
Yes.
Hunger Free Vermont, that's why I'm a little,
I know.
it's a little disconcerting, as you can imagine.
Yep.
Hearing these words.
Yeah. Look, what we want is the House version of S100 that you have before you. We want, it's a 1-year bill.
Sure.
It's got a 1-year time limit on it with 1-year funding. And that will permit all schools to move into to do their base year, to carry out their base year of getting into this program with state support. And then we would all know, I mean, I think you heard the superintendents, the principals, and the school boards associations all say the same thing. We would all know what is the actual cost, and each school district would know that for themselves, and they would know what their cost will be looking into going forward for the next 3 years. They will have a basis to make that prediction. And it is certainly my fervent hope that the legislature, and we're eager to help in any way, will identify a permanent funding source for universal school meals and move forward. That at least school districts will have a bridge year where they will not be scrambling between now and August to put back into place a pricing program. And we will have concrete data, which we don't have right now, to know what this program would cost, and for school districts then to be able to make their own choice going forward if the legislature chooses not to act for the school year 24, about what they want to do with this program. But at least we will know what we're talking about.
Sure, no, I appreciate that, I do, and I understand your position, but I have to be honest. You're representing Hunger Free Vermont, and you're saying you want to walk away from kids that need to eat because you're not getting everything. That's kind of how it's coming across. If we don't get all the toys, we're going to take ours, or whatever that expression is, and that doesn't feel good, knowing that you advocate to make sure kids are fed.
Yes, we absolutely do, and we
And I think you're,
and
no disrespect, but I think that's what your donors and others want you to do. And you're all saying, we'd be okay with kids going hungry if we don't get everything.
I did not say we'd be okay with it.
Okay,
I'm
but
asking
you
the
will,
account-
but you know
I'm
that would
asking the
happen.
committee- I'm asking the committee to concur with the House version of S-100 that's before.
And I recognize you're not okay with it, but that is what would happen.
Well, again, I'm requesting that
Okay,
this committee
okay.
support.
No, I just
the
wanted
House
to make sure
version of
that I was
S-100.
clear what you're saying. Senator Hooker, please.
Sure, thank you, thanks. You've heard the School Board Association, the Principals Association, the Superintendent's Association, all concerned about funding, continuing to fund a program through the Ed Fund.
Mhm.
Do the advocates have recommendations for funding beyond the 29 million for next year?
Mhm. So I understand very clearly the concerns that the associations are expressing. And I could say, I have a lot of thoughts about the way the Ed Fund is working right now and what should be done about that, but that's not what's on the table today. From our perspective, food for kids who are required to be in their school buildings for hours and hours and hours a day is a strange place to draw the line of the thing we're not going to fund as an educational support expense, the way that school counselors and janitors and school nurses and everything else is funded. So, and as problematic as property taxes and the other things that go into the Ed Fund may be, property and income taxes are more progressive in Vermont as a taxing system than sales taxes, which are the absolute most regressive kind of tax that you can do. So we have a concern as an organization that works to end hunger permanently and structurally and puts at the center of our concern the lowest income people in our state. It concerns us to be having a conversation about regressive taxes as opposed to having this come, as we say, off the top of the education fund or as categorical aid in the education fund, because at least that does draw on the more progressive taxing systems that we have. So, that is that, am I answering your question sufficiently, Senator?
Yeah, I wish there were a silver bullet.
I understand, and so do I. And that is not to say that Hunger Free Vermont is not prepared to work on this question of a long-term funding source for universal school meals in any way that we can. And that we aren't open to having this conversation. We are completely open to having as wide-ranging a conversation as we can about a permanent solution.
And
Please,
I
Senator,
I understand that, you know, it'll take the experience to have accurate data. Is there any, and I guess the 29 million is the kind of guess that you have for the cost of universal meals for the year?
That is
Is there-
JFO's guess. Hunger Free Vermont has a different guess that our cost estimate is between 15 and 24 million. We use the same data as JFO. We use a different methodology. I just want to be clear that neither JFO nor the Agency of Education nor Hunger Free Vermont knows for sure what it's going to cost. We based our cost estimate on a school by school analysis of what has actually happened in the Vermont schools that have been providing universal school meals from 2014 to 2019. How many students in each income category actually ate the meals? How did participation change once universal school meals was put in place as compared to prior to universal school meals? So that is how we arrived at our estimate range. And but I don't know that our estimate range is right any more than JFO knows whether its estimate range is right, because we've never had a year like next year would be. And so next year will provide a definitive answer to that question. So that is the best that I can say at this point.
Senator Chittenden and Senator.
So I understand the breakfast or the lunch or breakfast and lunch. Did anybody ever explore possibly universal meals for just K through 5 and then a rough estimate for that, and then leaving the middle schools and the high schools to revert back to maybe even just breakfast? But has that been explored at all to just focus on the elementary schools?
There was definitely discussion of that in House Education. The Agency of Education is strongly opposed to that approach, and we agree, because it's very difficult. So Vermont schools are not divided that way. So it would be extremely burdensome for both the Agency of Education and school districts to carry out some kind of approach like that. And fundamentally, Hunger Free Vermont believes that we need to feed all kids in schools. And in fact, high school students are more likely to not have their families not submit school meal applications. So if you look at the data, the younger the grades in a school, the higher the percentage of low-income students in general. And that is somewhat because family income rises as families are older, right? Parents are more deep into their careers, right? But it is also because more high school students are actually being missed who are eligible. They are not applying, their families are not applying, they are not eating the meals. So it's actually, stigma is more severe in the older grades. And so that approach is not one that we would support, and the Agency of Education also clearly said they could not support or carry out such a plan.
Senator.
There are some schools now using the community eligibility suspicion, right? Can those schools continue to do that if we also have schools on provision 2?
Yes.
And then I think it would be helpful to talk about provision 2, because what I learned last Friday that I didn't understand before about provision 2. One, I think would be important to tell people that we would be starting on this provision 2 path. So next year isn't just 1 year, it's the first year of a process that we would have to start under this provision 2 process. But confirm if I've got provision 2 correctly, which once you do the base year, the feds will pay a percentage of all the meals, right? Like based on the base year. And if you do whatever 100,000 meals, they'll pay a certain dollar amount per meal for all the meals served. If you're universal, if you're not collecting fees.
So, yes, and can I? And I submitted last night. It should be posted now. An example of how provision 2 works in a hypothetical school. Let me just quickly. Okay, so the feds pay a portion of every single reimbursable meal that meets the minimal nutritional requirements. Now, no matter what system you use, the feds pay a portion of every meal. So even the meals served to paid students are reimbursed a certain amount by the feds, 42 cents, 47 cents, something like that at this moment, and it changes every year. So the reimbursement rates are increased every year.
Does it change
to deal
by the
with
base year
inflation.
students or?
No, please.
Yeah, so never mind the base year for just a second. Every single meal, okay? What provision 2 and the community eligibility provision both do is they actually give schools more meals reimbursed at the free rate than they would get if they were just operating the normal program. Now, they do it in 2 different ways. And let's not talk about the community eligibility provision, I suggest, because there's a limited number of schools in Vermont that can use that provision and they're using it basically. So what we're really talking about next year is schools that can't use that provision because they're not eligible according to the federal rules right now, using provision 2. So provision 2 is the methodology that the federal government uses to reimburse schools for the meals when they're not collecting applications and matching a meal to a student in a income category every year, which is how the normal program works, which is why you need the swipe pad or the cash register and all of that in the cafeteria. So the way provision 2 does this is they use this base year where students are provided with universal meals. Families are asked to submit a school meal application. And so in the base year, meals are matched to students. And then and each month, the school is tracking how many students in each income category, free, reduced price, and paid, are actually taking a meal on any given day. So it's based on participation, not enrollment in the program. So it's based on which kids are actually taking meals day to day in each income category. And then those participation percentages are applied for the next 3 years to the meals served without any more applications having to be collected and without individual students being matched to meals anymore. And what that does is it increases the number of meals that are reimbursed by the feds at the full free reimbursement rate. And the reason why it works that way is because regardless, even under a universal school meals model, more free eligible and reduced price eligible, so more low income students eat meals than full pay students. And so in provision 2, if you have 100 kids in a school, this is the example that I described to you. You have 100 students in a school and 45 of them are eligible for free meals and 55 of them are eligible for paid meals. Let's just take out reduced price because I can't do that. It's the math is too complicated for me to memorize off the top of my head. And so you have a school that's not eligible for community eligibility. They have more higher income students, more ineligible students than eligible students for their free meal program, right? And of those students in the base year of provision 2, 40 out of 45 of the free meal eligible students take meals on average. So nearly all of the free eligible students. Only 20 of the 55 full pay students take meals. Now that's a pretty typical breakdown. I chose those numbers on purpose because that's pretty typical of the participation rates we see in a lot of our Vermont schools in a traditional model. That means that 67%, so there's 60 meals that the school is serving a day, 42 free eligible, 22 paid. Okay, so it's 60 meals. Of those 60 meals, 67% of those meals are being served to free eligible students. And 33% of the meals are being served to full pay. So that means that after that base year, 67% of all the meals served at that school for the next 3 years are going to be reimbursed by the feds at the free rate, no matter which student takes the meals. And 33% will be reimbursed at the paid rate. And that means that as all the students start to eat the meals, more paid students, because there's more paid students in the school, right? So more of those students will be eating meals, but a lot of their meals are going to be reimbursed at the free rate. So it maximizes the amount of federal funds that come into the meal program. And we estimate that universal school meals, as contemplated in S100, will draw down about $5 million more dollars a year in federal funding than we were receiving in 2019. So am I helping at all?
It's hard, that's why I think of visualization.
Yeah.
Like, this is
I
the way we
understand.
Like, take those 100 kids and put them in a bar
Yeah.
chart
Yeah.
and say, here's what we're doing now, here's where we're
Yeah.
getting your meal. And then here's what I understood from Amy on Friday is, if we do the thing that I was trying to explain on Friday, where we have the federal pay the first, whatever it is, 40% of the students there. And then we pay a few state meals for those people in the middle, because the federal one, 185% poverty is so low. We say we want to go up to 300%, and then the wealthy people should pay for the lunch.
Yeah.
We could do that, but then the feds, we won't get that
That's correct.
proportion for all the middle
That's
people.
correct,
So we're
because
just kind of
you
leaving that
can't,
money on the
you
table.
can't do a universal meals provision under the federal rules, plus make some people pay.
Right. So
And what you would be doing instead then is you would be setting up a new system on top of the federal system that the state would have to run, that schools would have to manage, and the Agency of Education would have to have a totally separate cleaning system. And you would have to calculate for every single student, in addition to what's already being calculated in the school meal applications, another level. Whether you said it was 300% or whatever you said, you'd have to do another set of mathematical calculations. It doesn't eliminate stigma. It doesn't maximize the drawdown of federal reimbursements. And it sets up
Actually, it could be more expensive.
a costly bureaucratic system separate from the federal system.
like, even if we collect money from the wealthy folks, since we lose federal money on the middle, it could cost more state
Yeah.
money. So what I was thinking is like, well, if we can collect 5 million for the wealthy folks, we'll at least collect 5 million.
I
So what
understand.
was explained to me is like, yeah, you might collect that 5 million, but you lose 8 million of
Yeah.
federal money, so you come out behind than you would do trying to.
That is
Because the
correct.
feds are trying to get schools to universal meals.
Yeah.
So they've set up the regs to make it, so you do universal meals, but you pay for it all year on your own, kind of the way I look.
Yeah, I mean,
We're gonna have to wrap up
they're
soon. So
theoretically trying to move schools to universals, but they're not providing the
Yeah.
support that they
Yeah.
should be providing. So that's the next fight we have to engage in. Yes,
this has been very helpful.
Yeah,
Thanks for
I'm
being on
glad.
the committee.
thank you for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Committee, is there anyone wants to hear from on S100 that would help people in any way?
I just want to know how we can find the money that we need to do all the things that are critical for
wanna do.
kids. And this is one of them.
This is
And
one of
then, and then PCB is the other one.
Mhm.
How can we balance out what we have? to-
Yeah, so one of the things that was shared with me is that revenues are
Yeah.
expected to be higher, and there might be a way to fence in some of those revenues that are coming in for PCBs that would also get us to that 47 million. I like your idea of creating some kind of fund for that, so that
Yeah.
like the petroleum cleanup fund. Yeah, and I don't want us to just be worried about our work disappearing because of a veto, just that you know, but that's also just the reality of the thing.
Are you talking about the food or the?
Oh,
Everything.
yeah,
Everything.
interesting, but I am, so Daphne's gonna have the secretary in tomorrow, and we'll hear directly from the secretary on, you know, representing the administration on
Sure.
PCB funds and meals, so at least we can hear directly where things stand. And that doesn't mean, as you know, things can't be overridden, et cetera, but it'll be helpful to hear directly. And so we're likely just to do second reading on 727. We'll do the Hardy first look amendment probably before third reading. 517, I believe, is being voted out today. No, 716 is being voted out of finance today. Means it'll be up on Thursday.
Finance on Friday. I'm guessing it's appropriations today, but they haven't invited me in.
Oh, I didn't know that it was.
Or
Okay.
it's the
They did not vote it out on
They did
Friday. They did not. They wanted an updated fiscal note. I talked to him over the weekend. So, well, anyway, it'll be fine. You're not here this Friday, correct?
I'll be here at 11:30 on.
Okay. Anything else? Daphne,